All right.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Value Add Podcast from Real World. I'm your host, Jan Lucanus, founder and CEO of Real World. And a bunch of people are coming into to this wonderful event today, which is about the origin story, not just of Real World, but it's very personal to me because it's my father. It's Jan C. Childress, comic book veteran, martial arts, a four-time Tai Chi World Cup grappling champion, and just an amazing human being that has given so much to me. Pretty much everything I do in my life, I do because my dad did it. And that there's a lot of credit to my mom as well, because she helped to create an ecosystem with my father. But my father trains. He writes comics. He exposed me. He's the reason I make films. So all of these things that I do, that are essentially what I do on a daily basis, all day, every day, are very much catalyzed by directly by my father. So I'm just incredibly honored to be able to take this time with him and ask questions, do a live Q&A here during our weekly podcast. And Dad, thank you so much for being here. Huge deal.
Pleasure. I'm proud of you. Pleasure.
Oh man. Well, let me let's start this off, because I have I'm so interested in your perspective, especially given that you're a granddad. You have I have a son. He's 7 years old, Jet, and what I do with him, I'm sitting in his room, aka my office, when he's not here, with a Silver Surfer action figure here, which is going to be instrumental to this conversation. Mm-hmm. And I'm surrounded by iconography that consistently reminds me of what I'm doing and what I've been trained to do. And I really want to start this off by just getting your perspective of what it means to create with family.
For me, creativity is really an expression of so much of what I've experienced through my family, being part of a family. And so whether it's growing up upstate New York, starting off in Jersey and Philadelphia, where I saw my first Spider-Man comic book cover. I remember that like it was yesterday.
What issue is that?
It was the Spider-Man annual, in which the cover, the backdrop is yellow, but you've got a host of Spider-Man poses on the cover. Before we get off, I'll tell you which Spider-Man annual it is, because I'm going to be reading it very shortly. Thank you for the Marvel Universe subscription.
That's technically the Marvel Unlimited subscription, and we are not getting any endorsement from Marvel to say this, but it's amazing and I highly recommend it.
It really is. So family, my uncles collected funny books. That's what they called them back then. And we're talking about the late 1950s to early 1960s. And so my uncles, and I come from White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. My dad did not read comic books, but my uncles did. And we would spend summers there every year. Sad Sack, Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos, Richie Rich, you name it, they read it. And they would each keep a collection of funny books, like today many of us keep magazines. And so whenever I would go down to White Sulphur for the summer, the first thing I would do when I went over to Uncle Julian's or Shag's house is go through their wicker basket and pull out all the comic books that I could get my hands on and just devour those. And so they influenced me a lot because they were such towering figures. They were role models for me. And and yet they took time to have fun, to enjoy life. They each raised families, strong men, but they took time to have fun. And so that experience with family influenced me a lot. So to be able to create with family, to be able to create with you, and hopefully with Jet as well as Jordy, is just a furthering a dream. That's what it is for me.
So how do you go from, because this is really interesting for me, because there's a bunch of stuff that I'm hearing here amidst all these wonderful people that we love and respect, for a bunch of things I'm hearing for the first time. So I'm wondering, how do you go from enjoying comics to becoming a comic book critic, that puts you on a particular path that essentially resulted in me being raised in the industry. So I'm wondering, can you walk me through what that was for you, what that journey was?
Because I was such an avid comic reader, and I read everything that was published. So everything that Marvel and DC published, if I could find it, I bought it. Little Lotta, Richie Rich, all of them. Archie, I bought them all. Dell Comics, the Dell Classics, I bought them all. And so I was reading voraciously while making sure to take care of all my schoolwork and my athletics, which were very important to me as well. But as I got older, I would and became more discerning in my reading. I started to pay attention to the letter columns in the various Marvel and DC would always have letter columns. Stan Lee had a lot to do with the advent of the letter columns. Feedback from fanboys and fangirls. And I was a fanboy, and there were folks that were celebrated fanboys and fangirls. And I'm thinking of Mark Lucas at the time, Charles Novinsky. Charles had gone on to work for Topps. Melissa Page, Uncle Elvis, who lived up in Norwalk, Connecticut, he was another one. And I started just chiming in, just writing letters, and my letters got published. And eventually, apparently, Charles Novinsky, Mark Lucas, and Melissa were all part of the Marvel Zombie Society. And so they invited, which was an amateur press association. So they invited me to join, and I joined. And what we would do, this is back in the day, this is before Facebook and social media. So we would have maybe 20 members of the Marvel Zombie Society. So every month you had to submit your piece for the Amateur Press Association. And you had to make 25 copies, because a copy went to the Library of Congress. So you had to make a copy for each person, plus a few to have on record, and then one for the Library of Congress. And so I was doing that, going to FedEx and having all these things copied. And what we would do would be a number of things. It was freestyle. So a lot of the times I would critique comics. And back then, when Marvel gave a no prize, and this was unfortunate for the creators. When Marvel gave a no prize, what they would do is they would send you the storyboard that the artist had penciled. And you'd have the storyboard with the original art and the notes from the artist to the inker to the colorist. And they were sending those out because these things were piling up. And I got some from Marvel. I got some from DC, because what DC was doing was they were sending them to letter hacks to preview comics. So I remember getting one from Green Arrow, was one of my favorite DC characters, and I got a storyboard that Mike Grell had put together, and it was for a yet to be published story. No, sorry, this one was actually the Xerox copy. It wasn't a storyboard. But I critiqued the comic book. So sometimes you would see issue number 1 of, let's say, if it was Green Arrow, and you'd see these letters from the fanboys and fangirls, and you'd wonder, how did they get an advanced copy of the issue? And that's what they were doing. And so they would send them around to the letter hacks. So that's how I became a critic, just making submissions to the Amateur Press Association. It was great. It was fun.
So how you know, I've asked you about this several times before, but I'm really interested in because I'm getting all these new details now. Connecting your growing name in criticism and being able to people knowing you in that world, in the fan world, the fanzine world, and then how did that get you to Jim Shooter at Marvel, editor-in-chief of Marvel? If you could tell us that story.
Yeah, that was an interesting one because we were living in Brooklyn Heights at the time. And Jim Shooter, who, as many folks will know, was a former editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics. And he went on to create Valiant, a new imprint. And when he created Valiant, he had, I believe, 3 titles that he came out with initially. And the problem I had with them was the lack of diversity. There were no people of color at all in his books. And there was 1 female in the book. And so, of course, I was a fixture at the comic book shop on Court Street, which is all of, as you remember, a block and a half from where we lived in Brooklyn Heights. So I went over there one day and I complained to one of my buddies in the store, and he said, "Don't stop buying the comic. Why don't you just call Jim Shooter and go over and talk to him?" I said, I never thought of that. He said, "He's right over in on the west side of Manhattan." So I did exactly that. I called up, and his receptionist answered the phone and put me on to Jim Shooter. And Jim Shooter said, "You know something?" He said, "I hear what you're saying." He said, "I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with our next title." He said, "But, you know, why don't you come on over and we'll talk." And so I came over the next week, and I remember this is the first time I met Jim Shooter. And Jim Shooter's tall, if you haven't met him. And so I just kept picturing him just rising from behind his desk. And he took me around and he showed me the whole outfit. Introduced me to Janet Jackson, who was his colorist at the time and a brilliant creator. But she had, at the time, had come up with some coloring techniques that were pretty advanced for the industry. The colors just seemed to vibrate from the page. But I went back after that experience. You went with me. I took you with me. So I went back.
I remember the halls because
Yeah.
we were there several times, and
Yes, we were. Yeah.
And Danny Fingeroth remembers him too. Danny from editor of Spider-Man Comics has just joined us too. He's on
Hello. Hi.
here.
Hi, Dan.
I figure when Jan sends me a special personalized invite, I should show up.
So I went back after that visit to Valiant, and I wrote about it in the fanzine. And just as a courtesy, I sent a copy to Jim, not for him to review, but just to let him know that it was being put out there. And a while later, and again, this is after a number of visits to Valiant to talk to Jim, they forced him out at Valiant. And so he went on, not to be deterred by that. Jim went on to create yet another imprint, Defiant. And he was on the verge of launching that, and they had hired a PR firm to do the advance work for this. And they needed someone to write a advanced piece for Defiant about Jim and his ideas. And Jim suggested me. So they got in touch with me. I wrote it. It appeared in I forgot the glossy comics magazine that was
Wizard?
Which one, Danny?
Wizard?
It wasn't Wizard. It was actually the precursor to Wizard. Wizard was a really fancy one
Right.
But there was another one.
It was Overstreet, right?
Excuse me?
Overstreet?
It wasn't Overstreet.
Comic Buyer's Guide?
Yes, Comic Buyer's Guide. So I wrote it for the Comic Buyer's Guide. And then I'm sitting over in Jim's office, just interviewing him. And at the end of the interview, he said, you know, if you ever want to write a book, just let me know. So I said, okay. So he presented two books for me. One was Shadow Man, and the other one was Good Guys. And he said, pick one. So I picked the Good Guys. I picked the Good Guys because they were kids about my son's age. And so that was, for me, would be the most fun. Just writing about what if my son had acquired superpowers, my son and a few of his friends. So that's how I got started.
Which had ripple effects, because on my flight to go study film in Florence, Italy, I'm sitting next to a guy that I just happened to be going to the same program at NYU that I was going to. And when he found out that my dad wrote comics, he was like, "What comic?" I was like, "Oh, well, you did the Good Guys," and and he was like, "What? Called the Good Guys from Defiant?" He's like, "I love that comic." Yeah. And I was like, "I'm like, oh wow, I've never met a kid my age that like was really into comics," and that was just an awesome experience.
Who did the art on that? Who was the
artist? Gray did the art.
Gray,
and that like Cher, that was his name.
Okay. I have no idea.
A brilliant artist. Just had some difficulties in meeting deadlines, but a brilliant artist.
So, Dad, this is really interesting, because I'm so one of the major narratives for my childhood was you writing a story for your favorite character, which is the Silver Surfer, and the unpublished book is called The Jade Crest. And I think about this often because it is instrumental in catalyzing the thinking behind Real World. And I would love it if you could share what the experience was writing a book for your favorite character that I would hear about all the time, see your drawings for it, and fantasize about it myself. And what were the challenges you faced in getting that creative officially recognized by the IP owner, in this case, Marvel Comics? Because it's still unpublished.
Yeah, it's still unpublished, and I never got it recognized by Marvel. I submitted it to them. I knew it was something that I was writing for myself. And as I advanced in the writing, and I'll tell you that the folks at Marvel were very helpful, because I was over there quite a bit, just going through some archives, doing my research, filling in some gaps that I didn't have of my own. But the story premise was one that when I first embarked upon it, I knew that there would be obstacles to getting it recognized, because it was an expression of what Dr. Martin Luther King called the immortal yearnings inside us. And for me, that immortal yearning was of meeting God, of meeting God incarnate. And the Marvel universe, for me, the creation of the Black Panther on one hand, as the first Black major superhero, and then the Silver Surfer on the other hand, who was an avatar figure. He was the closest personification of the ideals that I associated with godhood of any character. Not just in terms of his philosophy, his empathy, his compassion, but even the manifestation of his powers. And so my idea of Jade Crest was that the Silver Surfer, after being freed from Earth, returns to Earth voluntarily when he finds out that all those years that he had spent lamenting his imprisonment on Earth, he had missed the most vital gift that Earth had to offer, and that was an avatar, God incarnate. And he went back to Earth to find God. And so this is a story about probably the most powerful character in the Marvel universe coming face to face with God's incarnation on Earth, the aspect of God that has been sent here to save us from a nuclear holocaust. And so it involved the entire Marvel universe. And one of the obstacles that I faced with Marvel when I finally finished the book and presented it to them was the fact that I had Spider-Man in there. And they said, that's going to be a problem, because we've sold the rights to Spider-Man. And so we're limited in how we can we can put him in our comic books, but it was there were limitations on what they could do creatively with Spider-Man. And as it turned out, it was probably the same with the Fantastic Four, who figured very prominently in that story as well, because they were the vehicle through which Stan Lee and Jack Kirby introduced the Silver Surfer. So I knew there would be.
And what year was this?
Problems.
What year?
I was writing in around the late 1980s, early 1990s. Marvel was still located up on Park Avenue South.
Right.
one of the milestones for that time period was me boycotting Marvel the day that Youngbloods from Image came out. And I remember the feeling that I had walking in to pick up Youngblood #1, and the anger that I had toward Marvel, because my dad's book that he was working on for so long was not getting the reception that he wanted at essentially our family's favorite comic book company. So I felt this like inner turmoil walking into and I felt like really, really good picking up Youngblood #1. So I did distinctly remember that. So I'm really interested in this because I just finished Dark Knight's Metal last night, and I was torn because, as I am often with DC books, especially because I feel that DC has the biggest opportunity, and there's a compass missing. There's a compass missing in Warner Brothers. There's a compass missing in DC. So God bless them all. But so the compass is essentially part of what I feel like I'm here to offer on the earth, period, which is to take East and West and all these ideas, having been raised foundationally with them, I'd say very much equally or intertwined as from childhood, and to help to build bridges of understanding between certain concepts that Dark Knight's Metal is full of holes. They'll introduce a concept that is really, really high level, spiritual thinking, etc., and then connected to a really quote unquote wacky. That was one of the quotes on top on the that a critic put on the book from I think Entertainment Weekly. One of the wackiest comics you'll read. I mean, it shouldn't be perceived like that in my perspective. These are very serious, amazing, esoteric concepts that are being given to us in a modern form, and to respect storytelling, to respect these tools, and to offer them to the audience in a way that they can actually the reader can actually absorb them and do something with them. You could do something with story. That's what's missing in a lot of the DC and the Marvel stuff for me personally. But so I felt that last night, and I thought about it for hours, even this morning, upon finishing Dark Knight's Metal. And Danny and I had touched on the concept of something Tony Isabella said, who's associated with this comic. This is Marvel UK Shadow Riders comic about God in the Marvel universe, and how he was specifically talking about Ghost Rider having he wrote a character for Ghost Rider that was essentially a partner that resembled the common image of a widely accepted image of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And he was a homeless man. Mm-hmm. And this character was to help Ghost Rider essentially do the right thing, to choose the higher path, to find the things that'll most help the world, because essentially there are so many iterations of the devil, specifically Lucifer in Marvel Comics. There's so many iterations of this across comics, and that's very acceptable. But when you start to speak about God in comics, it becomes taboo. And I think that's really, again, I wasn't there on that conversation. I read about this conversation online and on Wikipedia, actually. So I reached out to Tony Isabella because Autumn, who's on here right now, did an interview with him about Black Panther, because I believe he was the guy who created Black Panther.
Black Lightning.
Black Lightning. There we go. So thank you for clarifying that. So anyway, I reached out to Tony, and the conversation did not evolve the way I had hoped, but it was.
That's why they say you should never meet your idols.
Well, I am not honestly too aware of Tony's work personally, but I was pretty blown away by what I found in this book, especially in the back of this this Marvel UK book that's not on Marvel Unlimited, the app. And so it's essentially, these are this is the paper trail of I think Jim Shooter, or according to the story I read, Jim Shooter was essentially against choosing a form of God to place in comics because they didn't want to upset people who might be associated with other religions, etc. And that is a really interesting challenge. I actually have a writing that I've been putting together for months about essentially about reframing God. It'll take me several more months to put this together, but essentially, like, there's so much information across across all these things that Dad, you and Mom raised me with, that is so helpful in understanding that any path towards God is a great path. So what does the form matter? And I totally understand if someone's chosen a particular form to worship, and there's value in that, there's massive value in that, and there's importance in that. But that importance and the information hierarchy behind it is something that we need to evolve as a species of understanding if we're truly to optimize what it means to be a human being. Because there's a lack of maturity in the perspective of God, from my perspective. So it's when we talk about Jade Crest and we talk about this book that was so important in and Andre's got a question, so I definitely want to jump to her in a moment, but this is just a very big conversation, and I wanted to, it's probably a conversation for another podcast, but I wanted to really touch on this today and just share some of these feelings with you, because it's so important to me and so instrumental for Real World, and I'll touch on why it's instrumental to Real World after Andra's question.
Hi, Jen and Jen. So fascinating to listen, and this, because one of the latest characters that joined the app, our Justice for Hire app, is Lucifer.
That was yesterday.
Yesterday we just got a notification that Lucifer joined the Justice for Hire universe, and now
no judgment.
No judgment. Now we're having this conversation. I think it's important to, from Real World's perspective, and also just to understand, taking ownership of one's faith and transposing that faith into a set of values portrayed by your character. I'm not interested into getting into, I am a Christian, I know how I call God, but I'm not interested in that particular conversation for this podcast. I'm interested into the set of values and taking ownership and transpose those values into your character, into your story. And why do you think this did not happen in Marvel yet? Because social media, I mean, we post on social media what we eat, where we travel, but when it comes to owning your faith openly and talking about it, it's still one of the biggest problems. So I'm just interested into your perspective on this, and what's the assumed risk, because I know the reward, but people are still not taking the risk and openly assume their faith. In and out of character, just to phrase it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you for the question. And I know you were in New York recently, and we missed meeting with you, and we regret that, and I want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Marvel, I want to give Marvel credit where it's due. Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created the Silver Surfer. They created knowingly a godlike figure, and they felt that while creating a godlike figure, they were also impelled to create the opposite, and that was Mephisto. And some of you who have followed Marvel, and one of my favorite artists was John Buscema. And he and Stan Lee did a brilliant book, hardcover book, that consisted of only full-page panels. And it was a classic struggle between the Silver Surfer and Mephisto. It was like Jesus in the desert. And if you look at the panoply of Marvel characters, you do see aspects of God, expressions of the Godhood. In the same way, if you look across the panoply of manifestations of aspects of God in the Hindu religions, you'll see Shiva, you'll see Brahma, you'll see Durga, you'll see Parvati, you'll see in the Marvel universe, you'll see Galactus. And if Galactus isn't Shiva, I don't know what character in any comic book universe is. So you'll see that peppered throughout the Marvel. The Watcher, you talk about the aspect of the godhood that watches and allows you the full expression of your free will, which is what separates us from the animal kingdom. That is the Watcher. You'll see it in many of the more cosmic characters in the Marvel universe, just expressions of God. But to your point, Andra, the step over the line and to manifest God, is it Buddha? Is it Moses? Is it Jesus? Is it Muhammad? Who is it? Is it even a he? Because I think of God as my mom. The first sight I had of God was through my mother's eyes. And so to express that in a really definitive manner for a comic book industry that is just coming off of this campaign to stamp them out because they were contributing to juvenile delinquency. And you had book burnings, and you had this ridiculous comics code. That is their history. They were almost wiped out. And so to step out with God is a bit much, is a bit much to ask. Now to sneak it in through the Silver Surfer, to sneak it in other, you look at T'Challa, you look at Steve Rogers before they had to really mess around with the character and make him less good. These were all aspects of the principles that we associate with divinity. They did not take lives.
Thank you so much.
Sacrifice.
Yeah, we have heroes and villains, so we covered that.
Yeah.
And and just technology, I think, saves people from burning scripts or others. But thank you. I'm looking forward to expand on this discussion later on. Thank you.
Yeah, this is a really interesting group of people that we have too. I mean, even for this conversation, because not only Danny with his history at Marvel, but Chip prior to being at the FBI with his work as Chip. Is it pastor or what is the proper term?
Yeah, I was a United Methodist minister. Yeah.
Minister. Yeah. And of course, everyone knows I'm an ordained minister to marry my friends in Texas, which I got online. That's right.
time.
First time I had queso, it was delightful. And even Vintage here, who's from the Justice for Hire community, is very much a young thought leader in nationwide as a absolutely. He's very much a young thought leader for young males, spiritually minded young males, and to watch the community that he's cultivating. I think there's going to be a massive, one of the things that I do is I predict culture, that's, and I'll talk about how this Jade Crest ties into Real World and what we're doing. But, there's going to be a massive pushback to God in culture, like within the next, now to the next several months to years. It's going to be huge. But I think that one thing that people are seeking is an elevated, more mature perspective of what God is and how we can connect to it in practical terms. So I think this is going to be really, really interesting for those who are absorbed in any particular path toward a higher consciousness, to be able to articulate that path and to put it in story form that is not necessarily, I don't look at this new coming as we're only here to reinforce whatever the belief is toward that higher power, for whatever the path is. Now, not to say that this person is wrong or this other person is wrong, but to essentially accentuate the rightness and energize more of that in any particular person's life. And so, I think this is a really powerful time for those who have been touching these tools for a while. Vintage, please.
So I didn't necessarily have a question, but this conversation kind of got me a little hyped because, like you said, I am very interested in this pursuit of knowledge and wisdom. And there's you mentioned the concept of how if we choose one path to express God, we have to take one path to kind of express God, but God is like the totality of everything. And so many people, they get lost in this one path, the specific trees on this path, the specific words on this path, and then they get tunnel vision. And so I've been trying to find ways on delivering this message of this multifaceted totality kind of thing. And it's really hard. But that's kind of what birthed my vision for the Infinity Tribe, where we have like many multifaceted individuals expressing the same message of like totality, like everything is God. And I feel like media is definitely a very good way of doing it, but it must be like multifaceted too. Yeah, I don't know. I just like to talk about this stuff and share that.
Jan, I think you're on mute.
No, please, Dad.
Okay.
Go for
Oh, okay.
That's a wonderful point. My Tai Chi master, Chen Kai Chen, had said to us once, because we were, we had folks in the class who came from different schools of the martial arts. And one of the guys asked him, what is the best? And Master Chan said, all paths lead to the summit. And it was very similar to what I had learned from Sai Baba, who was my spiritual teacher in India. And you think about it, and the way Master Chan described it to us, said, look, we're studying Tai Chi, and we're just starting, and we're at the base of the mountain, and we're right here. And somewhere over there are the karate folks. And then you got Aikido over there, and somewhere you can't even see the ninjas and all these different branches of martial arts. We're all at the base. And as we advance, and if we advance, we will start to scale that mountain towards the summit. And as we get closer to the summit, we look to our right and we see the karate practitioner, and you look to the left and you see judo, and you look beyond that and you see aikido. And finally, when you progress, if you progress, you reach that summit and we're all there because our principles were all the same. And that is what the connection between martial arts for me and my spiritual yearnings and path, that is the glue. That is the element that merged those two for me and helped me immensely in my life. Insofar as comics go, it wasn't so important for me that there be an avatar manifested in the pages. What the comics did for me, and what Marvel in particular did for me with the humanizing of the character, was to imbue in me and to reinforce in me the teachings of my parents about how to treat human beings, how to treat my fellow human beings, and how to treat this planet. And I can go through any number of Marvel characters who, for me, and Spider-Man was certainly one of them, as well as the Silver Surfer and T'Challa. The heart-wrenching decisions that they had to make in order to stick to their principles and to stay on a path that many of us could associate with divinity, the right life, a good life, an ethical life.
Yeah, I want to touch on something that and connect some dots here, and because Vintage mentioned the concept of the tunnel vision on one path, and you brought up martial arts. I was going to ask you to expand upon how that has influenced your storytelling. I think that you just answered that question before I asked it. I think one of the most interesting opportunities, and I want to share about a challenge that I had a couple of days ago, but one of the most interesting opportunities that we have with media is that when you choose to watch a show or listen to a song or go see a film or do any of these things, you choose a path, whether you're conscious of it or not. You're choosing a path, and it's in a container, that container of that piece of media. One of the most amazing things that happens when we engage in entertainment is we open ourselves up to receive information in a way that we don't open ourselves up for one-on-one personal contact oftentimes. We'll be in a conversation with somebody, we're thinking only about our story. But when we're watching a movie, listening to music, enjoying a show, we are open, and we are essentially allowing ourselves to be programmed with different feelings and experiences. Understanding that that is the process. Anytime someone is holding a phone, anytime you're looking at a show, like that is happening. So as storytellers, I think there's a certain responsibility to give what we feel is the best we can give. And when it comes to a path, oftentimes in my experience with someone who's choosing a particular path, let's say, like I got a few days ago, I had, I have a Tai Chi channel, which this will be on the Tai Chi channel too. And people watch my Tai Chi videos on a regular basis. And I shared a concept a particular concept that connects to an idea that's very broad. And someone said, Jan, I don't think your pressure circuits, I called it a pressure circuit, when you redirect someone's tension in a body lock or anywhere else, back through your body back into the other person. So they essentially feel a blockage and they make a different decision. When I described that in a little video, someone left a comment saying, well, Jan, that's just neutralization. There's nothing that you're talking about that's new here. And I said, well, hold on for a second. this channel is about building bridges from the larger concepts to concepts, tools that you can apply practically on a daily basis for immediate results. Immediate. So like there's a connecting that idea to anything, especially the concept of experiencing God, to me is very, very important, because neutralization, big concept, pressure circuit, very specific tool that I can show you how to drill immediately. And I find this a similar path of essentially choosing a structure so that you know how to break structure. That is the experience I have in martial arts, in Tai Chi. There are multiple styles of Tai Chi. And once you learn how to do a particular stance in one style, the only way you're going to, in my experience, the only way I've been able to understand where the flaws are in that structure is by training with another style and learning from other martial artists. And I think that that's how we bounce off of each other as people, regardless of whatever the discipline is. We learn from each other, and then we can hopefully collect that information, and then look at it not only as individuals, but together as a community, so we can find out where the optimization is. And once we find out where the optimization is, it doesn't matter if we're talking about God, we're talking about martial arts, we're talking about any particular discipline. Optimization is optimization, period. So I think this is just, that'll tie back into the concept of reframing God eventually. But, I'm really interested in how our stories, and using the story as a tool to share what we've discovered. Our stories, how can we share our story to show what we've discovered in optimizing our experience as human beings? And I always felt, and I didn't have the language to share it like this, but as a child, I knew that what you were working on with Jade Crest was exactly that. You were taking concepts from these beautiful comics that you layered across my childhood experience, connecting it to the spirituality and the martial arts, the physical, practical application of that spirituality from my personal experience, and then putting it into a story to share. And that to me is essentially divine work. And to see that divine work blocked, and now this is where it ties into Real World. For whatever reason, it was blocked, catalyzed, it planted a seed in me that I didn't realize until literally like 2 years ago, that you not getting that book published through Marvel when I was a child, and me feeling upset about it, made me say to myself, well, hold on. Everyone should be able to tell stories with their favorite characters. Everyone should be able to be a character in a story that they love. There's no reason that someone should be blocked for any particular reason outside of love and joy. We are here to share love and joy and to share our experiences. And there wasn't social media back then. There wasn't this rapid fire sharing of experience and narrative, which is happening billions of times a day, if not more. So, that's just me tying back what we're doing with Real World, which is essentially making movies and shows with the world. It's all started with Jade Crest, and knowing that comic book companies handling thousands of characters, managing all of this creative content. In a previous panel we did for New York Comic Con with Danny Fingeroth, right here, said, hey, you know what, Jan? Audience participation has been happening in slow motion, ever since the inception of comics. And now we're at a point in time where it's time for it to happen in real time. And it's not about what the brand says, it's about what we say as a collective. And that'll be guided by people who have risen to the top, the cream rising to the top, because the cream is wisdom. So the wise guides of a story world will be the ones conducting larger stories for a bunch of stories. Whether it's we don't have deals with Marvel yet, we don't have deals with DC yet, but we do have our first show, Justice for Hire, and that's really what we're doing, is essentially telling stories with the world. And it's because, Dad, you had those challenges that essentially catalyzed an opportunity. And I'm interested in in your follow through with that with me, what inspired you when I was in college? I was asking around, I was at NYU in film school. I was asking around, like, how do kids were handing out production company cards. And I was like, I want to do that. But these production company cards aren't backed up by a company. I actually want to have a production company. I'm interested in learning about this. And so I started, doing a little bit of research here and there, but I told you about this dream. So what catalyzed you to then incorporate my first company for me and gift it to me? Can you share that story, please?
Yeah, that's very simple. It was your dream. And so one of the great gifts of parenting is the opportunity to allow my child, you, to pursue his dream, and to offer you some guidance to make sure that it's sound, that you're not hurting anybody along the way, that you're ethical. But some of that is just choices that you're going to make down the road, and the choices that you have to make on your own down the road. But for me to be able to put you on the starting line, to be able to enable you to get a running start, that's the pleasure of being a parent.
So, I have to add to that I remember you talking about the importance of having an understanding when you first handed that to me. And I was 20 years old, so I was a junior at NYU, and this was 2003. And you handed me my first book of incorporation for Creative Impulse Entertainment, which is still we're on our 19th anniversary this year. So you mentioned to me the importance of understanding the creativity and the business side too, and you cited Jim Shooter. Can you just connect that a little bit more?
I sure did. A brilliant creator who was blindsided by business people. And so Jim needed stronger business acumen so that he could anticipate that and guard against it. And I did not want you to make that same, to step into that same trap. I felt for Jim Shooter as this was unfolding. And I did not want you to have to go through that yourself.
Well, thank you. Very big deal.
It can be ugly.
So when it comes to, this leads to fast forward, let's say, 9 years later? No, 9 years later. We're at Comic-Con in 2011, San Diego Comic-Con, and we're about to premiere our first animation, our first true quality animation, Justice for Hire, based on Justice for Hire comics. And I remember walking to the, I forget what hall it was, Hall C or Hall G. Rick Myers was, supporting us in this moment with his superhero kung fu extravaganza. And as we walk there, I'm saying to myself how tired I am and how there's a part of me looking around at our team, because we were, if you remember at that time, we were talking to investors about putting $50 million into the company. We're over here having these large investment conversations, and you say to me that when I mentioned about walking away, you say, well, if that's something you want to do, that's okay. We can walk away right now. And so I'm wondering, for you, having invested so much in me personally getting to that moment, what made you feel that it was okay, that what allowed you to say, if you want to walk away, do that right now. We can stop right now.
Yeah, because you had learned. You had learned. You had learned lessons. You were tired, but it wasn't weariness. It was something else that was leading you to that decision. If it was simple weariness, then I had enough faith in you that you wouldn't let, because you are a martial artist. I had enough faith in you that it wasn't going to be simply, I'm tired. It was going to be, this has left a bad enough taste in my mouth that runs to my core and lets me know that this really isn't me. This really isn't for me. If that's what you were deciding to do, I'm okay with it, because it's not time wasted. I would not have let you walk away if you were simply tired. But I didn't think that you were.
Well, no, thank you for answering that, because I thought about that for years.
Yeah.
Like, why did he say that? Why was he cool with just walking away?
Yeah. Hey.
So yeah, I want to.
What did you do? Did you walk away or stay with it?
Oh, we premiered we walked over there, we premiered it. We had a huge team at that point in time. We were, I think I had about 11 people out there that we were planning on hiring for, with this investment capital. And that deal fell through by the end of that year. And I was really tired after that. But I just remember all the expectations that were there. So it was a powerful moment. So Dad, I want to ask you, one more question on the comic side. I do want to open this up to everyone for questions. And I had one Tai Chi question for you too. But just in terms of you, I was 5 years old. You were showing me Akira, like the original cut.
Oh yeah.
The original cut. The one with the guy who has the voice in. For those that don't know, the original cut has the voice of the voice actor is the same guy who played Leonardo in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle show. So the original cut had that voice actor whose name escapes me, but God bless him. So I'm 5 years old, watching Akira. I tried to show my son Jet at what, 6, and he like just started crying a few minutes into it, and I had to turn it off because the little doggy got killed. Maybe he can't handle it. Maybe he's soft. So but I'm wondering, you were always on the bleeding edge of what was about to happen in culture, and it wasn't something that you were, you didn't talk about it like that. I'm on the bleeding edge. I'm like, oh, this is, it was just part of where you were positioned. Like, oh, hey, we should check this out because this is cool. Whether it's Akira or Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, or the Warriors of the Wind, just, depending on the translation, or John Woo. I remember you came home from Defiant Comics one day, and you're like, hey, we got to check out John Woo. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, and John Woo is literally the director that made me want to become a director. I had no idea what a director was until I saw a John Woo movie. I didn't understand what Steven Spielberg and all these people did, because all of their movies kind of felt the same in a good way. But John Woo was totally different voice and a totally different feeling. I didn't know you could move the camera like that. I didn't know you could do any of that. So I'm wondering, like, how did you perceive comics influencing other forms of media at that time, when you were, just passing along and sharing all this essentially foundational stuff?
I knew that comics had been relegated to a ditch, that they were perceived as polluting young minds, that they were not considered literature, even though Stan Lee, the Marvel books were written on a higher grade level than the stuff that I was reading throughout my 12 years of elementary and high school. Marvel comics were written on a higher level, but they had taken a hit, and again it was it goes back to Danny. You'll remember the psychiatrist who practiced up in Harlem.
Frederick Wortham.
Yes. Yeah. He really villainized comic books.
Well, what was the
But
name
at the
again?
same
Could you repeat it?
Frederick Wortham.
Frederick Wortham.
Wortham.
Yeah. Yeah, a very complicated character who did some amazing work up in free clinics up in Harlem, but nevertheless took on comic books and
Testified
vilified them.
Brown versus Board of Education.
Yeah. But while all this is going on, and again, I paid a lot of attention to the letters column, and I realized how intelligent these folks were who were reading these comic books. And then as I became more exposed to and meeting folks like Danny, I realized these folks are brilliant, and you can't have that much intellectual capital invested in an industry without it seeping out. No matter your efforts to suppress it, it's going to seep out. And so I could see that starting to seep into filmmaking. And you think about storyboards. Comic books are storyboards come to life, or movies are comic books come to life, which Marvel is demonstrating on a wholesale basis with its universe of characters making it to the big screen. But I knew that these folks were too smart to be kept down. That's basically what it was. Their ideas were just too sharp, too not just contemporary, but too far-reaching. I mean, well beyond what I was seeing on the big screen. So from my vantage point, movies needed to catch up to comic books. And I felt that it would happen.
Wow, that's a major statement. You know, I'm over here looking at this one point that with the Watcher on it, and just, you know, reading any of these, or reading, I think it was there's a book on there. I think it's issued Marvel Special 1000 or something like that, and just how they, when you start to touch the space characters like Galactus, etc., and you start to talk about the birth of the universe or multiple universes, etc., and how all of that has connectivity to, you know, things that great sages have talked about for many times. Especially, you know, I'm looking at the autobiography of a yogi from Yogananda, and him talking about essentially releasing the material form, and then having another body that you still have, and releasing that body and having another body that you still have, and traveling, you know, throughout the universe, and being able to see the birth of a universe, and like just concepts like that are in these grand texts, and to see how that is translated into comic book form and visualized. And you know, so when I touch these things, it's so very, very important to me to see it articulated in a way that again, if the container is beautiful, and then people will want the content. And so I love seeing these. I love seeing what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is doing. And Dad, you know, I have so many other questions for you and you know, I like just for the people to know, Dad was in a fan film when I was a little kid.
Oh my goodness!
Of the X-Files.
That was
when it was Philes, and I didn't understand when I was a kid why I was on set when my dad he was playing Mr. X, if you guys remember Mr. X, but he had a Santa Claus hat on, and so I don't I was going to move on to a Tai Chi question and then open up to Q&A, but I had to ask this, like what made you go on set and put on a Santa Claus hat for X-Files for a fan film, and what were fan films for you?
Danny, do you remember Charles Novinsky? Charles
Yeah,
Charles
he was a letter hack, right? He wrote a lot of
he
letters.
was a letter hack.
Yeah. I don't know if I ever met him.
Yeah, he ultimately went to work for Topps when
Right.
Topps started their comic book imprint.
He worked with Jim Salicrup there, right?
Yes, exactly. And it was Charles who got me involved in this fan film. He was a big X-Files fan, so he roped me into that.
So okay, he wrote you into it, but what made you really say yes? Like what was the experience of fan film for you? Like you know, you're in the comic book world, and now and you know that the rest of the industry is going to catch up. To me, fan films, to me at this point in culture, all movies for the most part are fan films. I think that anytime you see a sequel, you're watching a fan film, and sometimes you're even watching the original creator make a fan film of his original film. And so I think it's very rare that you get truly original pieces of film and television these days. So I think fan film is very important. I'm not taking away from that. What I'm saying is that fan film is so important that part of what we're doing at Real World is saying, hey, you know what? The fans can make the movies too and star in them, and therefore we have to respect that. And like what you're doing at your studio at $150 million is actually on par with what somebody shot on their phone for no money in terms of entertainment value and more. So I'm interested in your take of was it just fun for you? Did you see any? Like what was the experience? I remember you were shooting on VHS, if I remember correctly.
Oh yeah, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. I don't recommend that anyone see it. But you know, for me, the thing that comics did was it didn't just plant seeds in my imagination. It nurtured those seeds and allowed them to sprout. And so for Charles Levinsky, this was a way for him to express the imagination that was fed by his being a fanboy. Just you know, it could start with making your own X-File goofy holiday movie, as it did with Charles. It may be for somebody else taking the Batman TV series and making it into Batman trading cards. It was for you starting your own company to take your own ideas and put them to screen. So you could take 1,000 people with 1,000 different expressions of that imagination, all germinating from these seeds planted by, in the case that we're talking about now, comic books.
I have to tie this together for everybody. Somehow that led to Dad coming out of a meeting with Neil Adams, seeing the New York Film Academy, and then signing me up for it.
I was coming from Marvel that day.
Oh, from Marvel. Okay.
I was walking back from Marvel, and I walked walking down Park Avenue South, and I looked to the right, and there's this flag waving, and it's the New York Film Academy. And I said, So I just went in, walked up, and the president happened to be there, and he gave me an audience. And I said, my son is, you were junior
in high school.
You were junior in high school. I said, yeah, he's taking what was that computer class you were taking at Columbia?
Oh, C++ programming.
Yeah, C++. And I said, but this might be something that he would be interested in. So he gave me the application, gave me the whole rundown, and I brought it home that evening, and the rest is here you are now. But that's how it started, just coming back from Marvel, and the Film Academy happened to be 2 blocks from Con Edison where I worked.
So I have to, this is my last tie together question. So that I started at the Film Academy the same summer that I started Tai Chi with Sifu Keith Tong, our family's Tai Chi Sifu. And that training and tying together martial arts and filmmaking and starting to make martial arts films, obviously foundational for everything you're doing with Justice for Hire and with Real World but I'm when it comes to that leading to us getting pulled, you and I co-coached the US Tai Chi push hands team together. We were recruited by Josh Waitzkin, chess champion, chess prodigy, and that was in 2004. He came, he challenged, I was shooting my senior thesis at NYU, fight scenes, and he came and challenged you and the entire Sifu Keith Tong's class. And you called me while on set in the middle of a fight scene and said some guy named Josh just essentially beat up our entire class. And
he threw me to the pavement.
Yeah. And so I think for you and I, we had an amazing experience together as father and son on the US Tai Chi push hands team, being the first non-students to be recruited onto the US push hands team out of Grandmaster William C.C. Chen's school in New York. So I'm wondering, for training with Josh, Jade Crest not getting published by Marvel when I was 10 years old, planting a seed for audience participation in storytelling. Training with Josh, for me, planted the seed of what I call a transmedia trifecta, the interrelationship between the artist, the intellectual property the artist creates, which is funded by the company, and those 3 components, and that narrative that we've seen over and over again, which is George Lucas, 20th Century Fox, Star Wars, or Apple, iPod, Steve Jobs, or Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, you. That's, now we're all part of the story. So that trifecta to me is really, really important, but I understood it, and I understood what I was looking at because of training Tai Chi with Josh and how his ideas, how he was writing his book, The Art of Learning, at the same time that he was creating, training with us, and how he would articulate to me, writing the book informs my training informs writing the book. And I thought that interrelationship was amazing. And I said, well, what if there was a third component? And so I literally took a lot of even the concept of mastery. Josh described mastery as taking one thing, breaking it into 3 parts, training each one of those parts individually, and putting those 3 things back together. And now you've mastered a thing. Like, that's how he described mastery. So I'm wondering how did that influence you, that training? Because it massively impacted me. How did that impact you, training, especially, winning? You won a world title at 56 years old, and that's a huge deal, because it inspires me to know that, hey, and I see guys like Mickey Rourke fighting at 67 and stuff like, like 63, and Sylvester Stallone in his 70s going out and doing another Expendables. And so I see, you are a personal representation to me of what it means to be a martial artist, be a competitor, and have grit, long-lasting grit in a thing. So I'm wondering how did that training with Josh, which supercharged, I think, both of us as martial artists, how did it specifically supercharge you or influence you in any way across life, martial arts training, writing, creativity, strategy?
Yeah, it for me, I go back to Master Chiang Kai-Chen, who said, I had gone to my first tournament probably 20 years before that, and I didn't win a medal, and I came back and expressed my disappointment to him that I didn't win a medal. And he said, well, that's why you didn't win a medal. He said, you don't go to a tournament to win medals. He said, you go to a tournament to find out what you need, what you still need to learn. You go to a tournament to test yourself. And so for me, at 56, and I guess the one before that was 4 years earlier, so 52.
Yeah, it was 6 years earlier, 50.
Okay, 50. I needed to test myself because the martial arts journey that I was on mirrored and always has mirrored the spiritual journey that I was on. And whenever I would get stuck spiritually in my spiritual development, and like anything else, if you're going to advance and you're going to advance along a chosen path, in order to transcend, in order to reach the summit, you really have to transcend the path. You have to transcend the limitations. And you talked about it earlier when you talked about being eclectic and borrowing from other branches of the martial arts. So whenever I would get stuck spiritually, it was Tai Chi that would pull me back. It was my Tai Chi studies because the principles were the same. The goals were the same. The summit, get to the summit as a Christian, and I'm up there on the summit, and I know that I will see my fellow Jews. I will see my Muslim brothers and sisters. I will see them all. I will see the agnostics. They'll all be there. And it's the same with the martial arts. So I've going to those tournaments for me was graduating, or putting myself in a position to graduate, putting myself in a position where I could test myself on a world stage and find out what I needed to learn further to advance. And so each time I learned a lot more, a great deal more about myself. So that's really what it was about. It wasn't about meddling. It was about advancing as a human being.
And to be clear, you took home in 2004. You took home three titles from the Tai Chi World Cup in Taiwan, then called the Chonghua Cup. And in 2010, you took home one, and that was at the third, quote unquote, the third Tai Chi World Cup. So that's, again, Dad, it's, you're a huge inspiration to me every day. And so, it's really important. It's really important to have people to look up to, because it's so much in our culture, especially social media culture. There's a narrative, especially with my generation below. I noticed that people are scared of even hitting 30, and they're like, oh, if I don't do this by 30, etc. And I'm just, I remember when I was 28 and I heard that, I was like, oh, I got to get away from that person. I need to get far away from this person. And even casually, I rap. I go on the cypher scene, and like folks who are in their 30s think that they're OGs, and I'm just like, oh man, like, what are you talking about? Like, this is and I'm watching them get older faster because they believe that they're tired. They believe that their time has passed. And it's such a dangerous concept, because how we program ourselves is how our lives, our experience is going to respond. So, seeing you, and I remember some of the negativity that you would get competing from some of your peers because they were like, oh, you're doing that. And they would feel insecure around you because, oh yeah, you're training, you're fighting 17-year-olds. You got your rib like cracked by a 17-year-old in 2010.
It still hurts. It still hurts.
So, and they're out there playing for money, because if you're a local, you're getting a cash prize. They don't give the cash prizes to the foreigners. So I think it's really important to recognize how these choices can, as you say, transcend. Part of that transcendence is recognizing that there are things inside of others that may not be able to stay with you as you continue to rise in whatever any particular area that you're working on in life. That's been the lesson for me. That you may get to a new level in something, and then a person may not resonate with that, or may feel insecure, etc. And that is not, it's really not your problem. It's theirs, but it is your responsibility to recognize what you wish to keep in your space or to remove from the space. So with that said, Danny's heading out. Well,
yeah, Danny's got
any final, I want to open up for any questions or anybody. Danny, if you had anything you want to say before you leave.
No, I'm just as Stan wrote and Jack drew, the wise man knoweth when to speak and when to shut it up. So I will take that cue from Stan and Jack, but I do have to go. But thank you so much.
Hey, love you, man. Thanks for
Danny.
being here. And Dad, thank you so much for doing this. And it's a really huge deal. I'm incredibly excited. I was writing these questions for you, and I realized I had so many questions for you. And I'd love to. Andrew's got a question.
Hi, Andrew.
Hey, me again. I just want to make sure that I address this because ever since I know Jen and I know you and we have this amazing team, after this podcast, I cannot wait to hear you two and Jet in a few years talking about where Justice for Hire will be in a few years and his involvement. I always love when we have him for our meetings and say, we're building this for you to take it on. So hearing the story, I'm just wondering, because you two worked together on Justice for Hire, on the comic book, which is foundational for the app and for Real World.
Your dad actually wrote the first script.
Exactly.
Very first. Yeah.
How do you feel about, did you use the app? What's the feedback? If you can say it on the podcast. And what's your expectation as the mastermind behind Justice for Hire? What's your expectation from a technology that supports this story and from what we're doing?
And Jan, that's a question for you, right?
I think it's a question directed at you.
Yeah, for you, because I know what's Jen's expectation from the technology, but yeah, from you.
Well, for me, and just watching the work that you all are doing as a team, I just see that this Justice for Hire as a vehicle for bringing fans into storytelling in a quicker and less cumbersome way than it was for Charles Novinsky when he got together and got a group of us together to do this goofy little film on a VHS in somebody's apartment. It's much more exciting what you're doing. It's much more accessible what you're doing. And because of that, it can involve a much wider and richer diversity of people. So much of what I've seen as I've traveled through comics has been less inclusive than the world I see about me. I think what you guys are doing is going to open those doors.
That is a quote to be pulled.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of this. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
My last question is, why did you decide to read me comics when I was a kid?
I wanted you, first of all, to learn to love the written word, and to be able to combine that with this brilliant artwork that I was seeing, and to be able to connect those two. So I was reading to you before you could even talk. So I would read to you every night. And one of the first things I read to you was Anne Nocenti's Stranger Things. Not Stranger Things.
Someplace Strange, which I have.
Someplace, yeah. That was one of the first things I read to you. I read The Dark Knight Returns to you. There's a whole bunch of stuff I read to you. Mazinger, I read to you. But yeah, it was I love comic books. And I wanted to share that love with you. And as you got older, you were going to decide whether you were going to stick with comic books or you were going to do something else. But for me, something I love, I'm going to give you a taste of it and then let you decide. So that's what I did.
To be clear, Dad wanted me to draw his comic books. Drawing wasn't my thing, but now his grandson is super into drawing and wants to draw his comic books. So, so he's getting his wish. Dad, thank you so much.
I gave you the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this, Dad. This is a big deal.
You're welcome.
And
thank you.
And Chip said he had to go early, but he said thank you, and he was going to watch the rest or listen to the rest when it's uploaded later on tonight. And Cynthia was here too, and so
I saw, and Jordy and Elena are here, and Martha's sitting over there listening in.
Love you so much, Dad. Love you guys. Everybody, thank you for showing up for this, and hopefully I'll be able to get Grandpa or great grandpa on next week. So
we'll work with him.
We'll work with him. And so this is such a big deal because my intention is to we started live editing Justice for Hire last week on Twitch, meaning that this has never been done before. Like there's nobody I can look to for guidance on this, because I've been asking around. If somebody's listening and they know about someone else who's done live editing of a show, and period, please send it to me, Jan Lucanus. But we're in a position right now that we've worked for. Essentially, I consider this my life's work. That has been implanted since childhood, and coming to a place right now where it's not just about the stories told. It's not just about these the movies or the shows or whatever container you put it in, comic book form, but it's about the story of the story. It's about sharing how we're getting there. And this podcast is an example, a great example of that. It's part of the story. So to be able to talk to you, Dad, and to share this with our network, our community, is a very, very big deal. And to let people know how these things tie together, because at this point, we're all part of the story. So, and that's what Justice for Hire is really, being the first, the first crowdsourced cinematic universe, first show we're producing with the community. And that's what ReelwUrld's all about. So, this is part of that narrative. Our live editing is part of that narrative, because we're showing how we're putting this together. It's not just about watching the series. It's about us sharing the challenges and the learnings along the way, so that we can all rise together. We can all learn from each other, because we can always learn from different parts of the story. So if you are a person who wants to join Justice for Hire, you can join at justiceforhire.app. If you want to watch the live stream, you can go to twitch.tv/Justice for Hire. We're doing it daily, pretty much 5-6 days a week. So I'll be on there every day, except Sundays, maybe not Sundays, but maybe. And of course, ReelwUrld, ReelwUrld. That is our company, our studio, the world's first social film studio. We are dedicated to making movies and shows of the world. So we are fundraising right now on wefunder.com/ReelWorld, ReelWRLD. And this is all about crowd ownership. I used to tell venture capitalists in New York, and I don't care if you give us $10 million tomorrow, we are doing an equity crowdfunding campaign because it is spiritually part of where we need to go as a society. Fans need to own the companies that produce their favorite stories. And fans not only need to participate in the stories, but they have to have ownership. They have to have a stake, skin in the game. So it's really important for us to gather the fans around this. And if you want to be an owner, join us. It's a great journey. And love you guys. And if you want to reach out to my dad, it's Jan C. Childress. Dad, where's the best place for people to find you?
Hotmail.
Hotmail. Find me on Hotmail. That's the Batman voice. Yeah, thank you so much.
Send me an email, jcchildress7@hotmail.com.
Wow. Wow. That's I'm not sure the last time someone gave out an email on here. This may be the first email ever given out on the Real World podcast. So that's phenomenal. Thank you so much, Dad. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to press stop right now, and we'll see you soon.